In today's episode of the Platform Presents podcast, I'm here with Trice Alford, and he is basically hailing over as the head of marketing from Sellozo. And essentially, this Kansas City based startup is creating marketing solutions for Amazon e-commerce. And it's quite an interesting place to be. And today we want to be learning, how the folks at Sellozo support their clients and also how Trice is thinking about growth. So Trice, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Appreciate this as well. So maybe give us that 360 overview. What is Sellozo all about?
Yeah, so Sellozo is essentially an AI-driven, Amazon-focused PPC advertising platform. It's essentially a platform built to help Amazon sellers manage their campaigns, their keywords, and their bidding at a product level, so an ACOS level. So not to get too technical, but it's really built around helping sellers optimize and automate things so that they can save themselves a bunch of time and a bunch of money.
Very good. So does that mean, just like, for everybody who's like listening in, does that mean so you would help to tell them like what to change on their listings, like what is missing, or like maybe some practical implementation and implications for folks?
Yeah, so the tool is built essentially I'll give a seller the ability to import their campaigns that already exist, set their ACOS goals, and essentially they could let the self-performing platform right there just optimize to their ACOS goal, not change budgets, not change anything, because then all it would do is optimize your bidding daily to make sure you were getting the most toward that ACOS. But in addition to that, when people want to get a little more specific, we have the ability to help them figure out and discover keywords, and then also automate campaigns. So let's say they have an automatic campaign and it has a budget and they've got some keyword that hits a certain conversion goal and they want to pull that into like an exact match campaign that's standalone. Sellozo can automate that for them so that they then are taking the best performing keywords in a campaign and separating it out so that it can get even better for an ACOS goal versus an automatic campaign or something like that. So there's a lot involved in it, but essentially that's what it comes down to, is just giving the people tools they need to really manage these things at an ACOS level, which most tools aren't built really kind of with that focus in mind. So
yep, makes sense. Quite interesting. So that gives us an insight as to what you guys are doing, which problem you're solving. Maybe tell us a little bit more about the types of clients. I mean, obviously they will be on the Amazon marketplace, but maybe what is it? Is there like a certain size that you typically see coming in, certain maybe even industries? Maybe tell us a little bit more who benefits the most from Sellozo.
Yeah, it's a great question. Because like everybody that's in the Amazon space understands this, especially once they get into it a little bit. The Amazon's telling is complex. There's a lot that goes into learning the landscape. PPC is also complex, and learning that landscape in addition to Amazon can be difficult. And then when you bring a tool into the mix, then you're learning the tool as well, whichever tools you use for whatever purposes. So with PPC tools, it's like a threefold, because you've got this learning curve for people that can be cumbersome, and Sellozo helps, I think, in a lot of ways simplify that PPC part, because you don't have to be an expert in PPC. You can set things up, you can let them kind of roll a little bit, and let the optimizer that we have build, just help you perform better. So it can help a lot of different people. Brands and agencies that sell, obviously, they've got a lot of knowledge. They understand PPC. They understand the Amazon space. For those people, having a tool really helps, because they've got a lot of heavy lifting to do. There's a lot of bid optimizations, a lot of campaigns, a lot of keywords, and letting a tool automate all that, more than anything else, just saves them a ton of time. But when you're a seller that's just beginning, or even in been doing it for a while, but now your business is growing, Sellozo can help there too, because we do have a team of people that are expert support folks that can consult with you to help you on a like weekly or monthly or full-time basis to manage that for you, just kind of depending on what you want to do. And I think that helps a lot. There's a lot of new sellers that come into the space that are overwhelmed. And I think tools, if they're too complex, can take too much for them to really get up to speed. And so they kind of, fizzle out basically. And I think if there are teams like our support team that it's there to help them, it helps their process. So Sellozo can work for anybody. It's just a matter of recognizing that if you're newer into the game a little bit, getting help is an absolute must, because it will make the difference between, I did it for 3 or 4 months and it didn't work, or I've been doing it for 3 or 4 years and I was selling $100,000 a month. You know what I mean? Like, it's just night and day. So
it makes complete sense. I was actually on the website just prior to the call, and I exactly noticed that even in the very early plans, you were like chiming in that private consultation calls. That's actually quite unique approach, I think, for a lot of those platforms. Quite interesting.
Yeah, we even try. So ours is a threefold process. So first, we're talking about a demo with somebody just to get them exposed and get them introduced and see if what their level of interest is, obviously. The second is, once they've decided that they want to try the 14-day trial, to have an onboarding call to help them get connected, understand the tool, really get a sense for the lay of the land a little bit. And then the third is, our support team actually does an audit of their existing campaigns and says, here's what we think your recommendations, or our recommendations are for where you should go with your campaigns next. And at least gives people some, initial steps to take in taking their campaigns, integrating them into Sellozo and setting them up so that this optimizer can run efficiently and help them, save money and time, which and potentially increase conversion. So
yeah, makes a whole bunch of sense. It's super interesting. Really love the approaches you guys are doing. I think a lot of more complex tools are missing that piece out a little bit. So you're quite interesting. Let's talk a little bit about growth, right? How do people hear about Sellozo? Like, what is a typical buyer's journey, or, what sort of, let's say, what is the key channels that you're excited about as a marketer for Sellozo?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like most companies, when we started, we didn't have a brand. People didn't know who we were. We're totally from scratch, startup out of thin air mentality, and trying to build something that's in this space, especially, is tough. And so I think like everybody else, we thought we'd just have to pour money into lead generation and just that would be the way it was. And that's just not a great long-term strategy, especially if you have investors, or you have a certain pool of money that you're going to work through, and it can be expensive, and you can really be inefficient with those dollars. And so we shifted on this year actually to or late last year even now, a fully content-driven growth strategy. So our plan was, and there's a lot of people in the space, obviously put out a lot of great content, and so we're a little behind, honestly, in comparison to some of these other brands, whatever their tool set is. But we just found that in the Amazon community, there are so many people that are new to it, that are just thirsty for information. And so there's a lot of organic search. There's a lot of search inside of YouTube. There's a lot of search inside of social. There's a lot of just engagement there of people in this industry looking to better understand the processes and the systems, and how do you sell through FBA versus how do you manage your inventory, and how do you run PPC? Those are all really big questions. And so we've shifted gears, and what we're trying to do is just help people understand how to use PPC in general, and why PPC is an important part, and why listing optimization is important to PPC, and why inventory is important to PPC. Like, there's all these things are connected. And so now we're really focused on that. And as far as, your growth, or your question about the channels, we have really committed. We started with a podcast, and very similar to this, was a video driven podcast. So we'd share it in social, and we'd do some things with it like that. But as it's gained visibility, and that podcast is called Two Amazon Sellers and a Microphone. It's hosted by
Cool.
two of our guys who are also sellers. And so they have a lot of great context. They've been selling for 7 or 8 years. They really understand where people are in their customer journey right now, and how they're selling into Amazon. And so we started with that, and then we started building more and more content around our support team, who have such great depth of experience and knowledge in the PPC space in Amazon, that they really were experts at it. And letting them get out and talk and answer questions for people has really helped, I think, for a lot of people, just solve really obvious questions that we get from a lot of different people, or just new things, dynamic bidding from Amazon. What are those bid strategies useful? How do you use them? When do you use them? Those kinds of things. Those are really, really in the weeds kind of questions. And so for us, content has really become a big part of it. We've got a lot of engagement with community. And I think for our team, it's been great because we have a better sense for what people's questions and needs are than we ever did before.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, you're speaking with them on the podcast and you can answer the questions, right? In the articles.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
And then the podcast is really just bringing in people that are in the industry and being like, hey, let's talk about what you do, because what you do is interesting to me because it relates to what we do. And so it's a really good conversation. And we've had more than 100 guests on already. And it just feels like the progression of it is so good, because we have people that maybe even do the same, very similar things, but they just have very unique perspectives. And now we've even started having sellers on to tell their stories, because you're in the industry, you understand, like a lot of these people have, like, I built something from scratch, from nothing. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea how Amazon worked. That was 5 years ago. And now I'm selling $1 million a month. And you're like, that's insane. That's amazing. And how did they figure it out? I think that's really important to people, and just hearing from anecdotal like that of, well, here's a guy that figured it out, like, or she did it like this, how, look, maybe we can do it that way, whatever. So I think that's really great.
Very cool. Let's talk a little bit about the website, because you mentioned content is becoming more important. People are being drawn into learning, or not being drawn into, they're actually just learning. I mean, it was just on your blog, there's like a couple of hundred Amazon basic posts. So it's quite interesting, actually quite a rich content there. What's your personal take on the website at the moment? Like, what do you think is a major strength versus where do you see still room for improvement, right? Marketers are always very critical. Like, where do you see the page heading?
Yeah. I think, I've been marketing a long time, and the two things that are the hardest are, one is, from a content perspective, is just trying to continue to focus content in certain areas, whatever your keyword strategy might be, or your content strategy, focus content around those things. Connecting, from an SEO perspective, connecting the dots. I mean, that's the hardest thing in the world, probably for our marketers, because it's very technical, or it can be very technical at times. And there's not, even with all the tools in the world, there's not a lot of visibility into maybe why something didn't rank that you thought really would, or the connecting of all these different pieces of content that are very related under some kind of pillar piece of content, right? And why that group of things didn't connect, and then the other part is, like anybody else, Amazon or Google changes, just like Amazon changes. Google changes, and when they do, it's really, it's every marketer's nightmare of trying to figure out what to do next. And over time, over the last 10 years, Google has made some really significant changes, for the better, honestly, but those impact everything now. Page speeds and performance is just as important as the content itself. And so I think, as any marketer, focused in digital would tell you, is those are really tough things to balance, and you have to stay ahead of it if you can, or at least move fast if you can. And so I think for me, this isn't necessarily like nitpicking our work or what I'm doing, more than just saying those are the obvious things. They're going to always be an issue. You're always going to have to tackle content. You're always going to have to tackle SEO optimization. You're always going to have to manage to Google's expectations. I think we were, just in the honest truth is we had a lot of content. We weren't necessarily very optimized or optimized very well. And so we focused a lot on that. And I'd say in the future, we're probably behind the curve. There's a lot of content already out there on our industry or in our industry and on our topics. And so ranking highly is very difficult and very competitive. And so you have to be aggressive and stay on top of it and just continue to develop content of a lot of different varieties. And I think the one thing that people that aren't in the marketing space don't understand is when a marketer like myself says content, we do not mean words. It's words, it's video, it's podcast audio, it's all of those things. It's images, like the video itself has a lot of words and you can get it transcribed and you can put those words on there as well. So that's easy to see. But then also the audio is the same way. And the images all have alt text and tell stories themselves. And all of those things are important. So so it's an interesting piece because there's a lot that goes into it. And I think that's where we're at, as a group right now.
Anything that you've learned about content distribution? Because obviously one thing is optimizing, the other is distributing it afterwards. Like, what's your take on that?
Well, I love it because there are some platforms out there that make it really easy, but it's mostly driven toward backlinking. And I think backlinking is, there's a lot of people that are really, really focused on that. And I think the average person has no idea what it is. And so it's underutilized probably by a lot of people, the vast majority of them. But the ones that do use it don't necessarily use it well because it's not necessarily highly relevant backlinks. It's just backlinks to backlink. You know what I mean? And I think the content distribution models that are out there, especially like press release driven type things and stuff like that, are really good, and they can get you into a lot of places. I do question at times, like how relevant are those going to really be? So it's a mixed bag, and I think you have to kind of figure out, like, if you can inexpensively automate some distribution, cool. But then you also still have to do the hard work of finding good, relevant, highly relevant places for content to go as well. So.
Cool. I mean, you're obviously driving traffic to the page. Maybe let's talk a second about actually, winning them for example, for a demo. Like, how do you, what do you kind of do in order to sort of figure out why people do or do not convert on the website?
Great question. I don't know that I'm really great at this, to be honest. I think it's a really, really difficult thing. We do use HubSpot, which helps us understand a little bit about where people came from and where they went. Obviously, analytics does that as well. Analytics obviously gives us a little bit of visibility into, from like an organic search standpoint, what topics may have driven them to the site. I think the honest truth is we see so much of our content now coming from organic and direct because of our content in YouTube. It gets indexed differently and better probably than just even blog content, because it's obviously because of its direct relationship inside of Google. So I think what we do really is to try to understand the YouTube audience first, and to do a little bit more with them from a marketing standpoint, where we're driving content to them, things like that, because we do see there are more conversions coming from that group than we do just organic.
Makes sense.
So I don't know that we have a great visibility, to be honest, into it beyond that. I think that's probably, we're in a place right now where we're generating a tremendous amount of content. So that's probably our next step, is to better understand from an organic standpoint, or from a, sort of decision-making process. If we spoon feed people content, like retargeting to them with more content and not ads and things like that, well, that's great. That's really smart marketing, but is it working? And, like, even if you captured somebody's email address and you're, emailing them every month or week or whatever you're doing from an automation standpoint. Is it working? So I think that's the next step for us, is just understanding those at a finer level.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's switch gears a little bit. Like we talked about growth, we talked about great strategies. I think you gave a tons of meat to the community also to bite their teeth into, and then look at your strategies. I think what's quite interesting what you mentioned, the relationship of YouTube and organic, kind of like how potentially being a Google platform helping there quite a bit. I want to switch gears completely and ask. Sure. We spoke about content a lot, and there is a lot of content, not necessarily only on Amazon, but also on, how to be a great, marketer for software.
Sure.
So
yeah.
How do you filter through all the stuff that is out there? Like what's your favorite platforms? Like, how do you decide what to read in order to grow?
That is a great question. Well, to be honest, I'm a little older than probably the average, marketer these days. So I honestly, I rely a lot on LinkedIn because it's kind of like Facebook 10 years ago. And once you become a member of a group inside of some kind of silo, their content just fine. It's an amazing content platform. Because once you've sort of made a few of these determinations around like what you do and what industries you're in and the communities that you're involved with inside of LinkedIn, the content just seems to, the algorithm works really well to find you with content. So, so a lot of it comes through that methodology. I just spend time there, or I get a lot of notifications from groups of new content and things like that, or peer-to-peer types of content. So, so for me, it's that. Also, I'm involved with a chief marketing officer group called CMO Club. That is a very peer-to-peer driven group of people. So there's a lot of content there that comes about, best practices and new things that are happening, or, there's a lot of workshops and just webinar types of things that are not necessarily meant to sell you anything. It's really peer-to-peer driven, other people in the club that are presenting on topics. So, I've worked for smaller companies in comparison to some of these brands that are in these clubs. And so we don't have as much marketing technology as, big groups. Salesforce is a great example, they've got some of the biggest technology on the planet for marketers and also for themselves. And, HubSpot's the same way. And just, they generate a lot for themselves about how SaaS tools work that applies to them and to everybody else that's utilizing SaaS. So, so it's good for me because it removes a lot of the selling process, and it allows you to just, you're going to, integrate yourself with some kind of content because it's useful to you, or you're interested in the topic, and that kind of thing. So
cool. Let's wrap it up with some rapid fire questions. Are you ready for
Sure.
this? What's the last book you read? What's the last book you read?
The last book I read was You're a Badass with Money. Jen Sincero is written a series of those books, obviously. I've read two of hers. You're a Badass, obviously, was the first one, and then the You're a Badass with Money. My wife, I think, has actually read a bunch of them. I think she's very, very witty. So that's the last book I read. And then I'll just take it from here. But I'm really looking forward to the Dune movie coming out. I've read the book probably 5 or 6 times since high school, and the book's fascinating. So I'm really interested to see how the movie's going to be.
Very cool. Actually, I've been reading her books as well, The Betters with Money. So just recently. Very cool.
Yeah.
What's one single thing that the company's focused on the most at the moment?
What's one single thing the company's focused on the most? Well, I'm going to tease something we have not teased yet at all. We're in the process of developing some new technology inside of Sellozo to simplify the process even more for people. And we're calling it Autopilot. And it's going to enable people that maybe aren't really in depth with PPC or in depth with Sellozo as a tool itself to come in and really simplify the way they launch their PPC optimization or their campaigns. So.
That's a good teaser. what would you do if there's no boundaries in technology anymore? Everything is possible. What's the one thing you would fix for your role?
Oh man. Well, I think this is not really a Sellozo thing, but a marketing thing. The hardest thing for marketers is, in my opinion, is outlining for leaders why marketing can work for them and what the technology inside of the marketing can do for them. And that commitment and investment and trust is, the CMO role is like the fastest churning C-suite role there is. And it's like less than 3 years. It turns over for most companies like very frequently. And with Sellozo, we're great. We're a really small team, and so it's a little bit different for us. And also our tool is a marketing tool, so we have a different perspective internally. But I think the problem for a lot of people is, how do you use software and tools and technology to improve what you're doing? And yes, it's a cost, but you get so much out of it, and helping CEOs and executives understand that investment is powerful and it can return, tenfold, whatever, you know what I mean? And so if I had no boundaries and technology was amazing for everybody and worked great, that would still be the thing I would focus on, is just helping people understand, trust your marketing people. They're not gonna make bad choices. And if they do and software doesn't work, they'll be the first ones to tell you that they can't figure it out and you should move on.
Very cool. Yeah, makes complete sense. Very, very interesting. What's the last thing that kept you awake at night about the company?
Last thing that kept me awake at night. Well, I think for me, it's we have a lot on our plate at Sellozo. We have a lot going on. We have a lot of customers we're trying to help. And, the thing that keeps me awake probably at night is just the ability to get it all done and, have continue to build great resources from our team here internally so that we can help customers, and so there are days when I'm like, hey, I'm creating, trade show collateral to send. Our guys are going to be in Austin for a Amazon sellers event that's happening down there in a few weeks. So that I was doing that today this afternoon I'll be uploading content to the site and, working on SEO. So it's, just a range of just getting all the things done that need to be done more than anything else. So, yeah.
See. Very last question would be, and I want to do a bit of time travel with you and get back to Kansas State, right? So you kind of, you're getting out of Kansas State, you're ready into the world of marketing. What's the one advice you would give yourself?
Ooh, man. I think my advice back then would have been, so I got into, like websites and media really early on in my career. My college newspaper was the first website for a college newspaper in the country. And so, this is circa 1995, like it's a long time ago, right? So I got into it early, but I got into it from like from a media standpoint. So I worked for newspapers and I worked for media companies at the beginning of my career. So I think I probably would have made the shift to like a digital agency much, much earlier. I went to work for a big digital agency in the middle of my career, and it changed my perspective on technology and media and everything, because they were literally building tools for big brands. And like I worked for Ford for 3.5 years for that agency. I worked for Sam's Club, an e-commerce giant, and nobody thinks of it like that, but they did millions of dollars every day in e-commerce, and and that was 15 years ago. And so I think if I had shifted earlier, like out of college, to find a digital agency to really get a better handle on where technology was and where it was going to go back then, I'd still be where I'm at probably, as far as like my interest level in marketing and technology and how it goes together. But I probably would have been much more involved in it so much earlier on that there wouldn't have been a learning curve, that I had coming into it. So yeah,
makes sense. Trice, I really appreciate you taking the time with us today and give us an insight about Sellozo's world, about your journey into marketing as well. So I want to give you the very last word. If somebody would be forgetting all that we discussed about Sellozo, what's the one thing they should remember?
The one thing they should remember is with Sellozo, you're getting a tool that's going to help you save time. It's the money part is obviously great as well, but it's the time savings. To really do well on Amazon, it takes a lot of optimization, and automating that is the only way to go in PPC. Just a huge difference maker in your ability to run your business. So, yeah.
Thanks a lot for being a guest on Pathfunk Presents.